Things in this world aren't always as they seem, and there appears to be much beyond our comprehension and what we are often taught growing up. This all started in the spring of 2018 when my fiancée and I decided to move back to her family's farm. Our first house was small, but the price was right, and it had what we needed with 5 acres and a barn, but after 5 years the plumbing was having issues, and we found severe termite damage that was going to be more trouble than it was worth. Financially we couldn't afford to build what we wanted yet, and even though we both swore we would never live in a double wide, that's what we decided was the best plan of action given the circumstances until we can build our dream barndominium on the farm. So our house is delivered and set up in March. We have 50 acres that is bordered by the Ouachita National Forest. To an outsider these mountains may not seem like much, but it's one of the oldest mountain ranges in North America, and erosion beyond our comprehension dwindled what easily rivaled the Rockies into what you see today. This was a dream for an outdoorsman like myself. Not only did we have our own 50 acres to hunt on, but thousands upon thousands of acres of deciduous mountains to roam freely. But the farm did have its oddities, and weird things sometimes happened. The first year we dated we hunted a couple times there, and I discovered very quickly the land behind the barn was uncomfortable. It just gives you the willies and feeling of being watched. This area has a rich history of a Maine wagon trail and Indian trail very close by. Then there's the history of the haunted inn that is on the property adjoining ours, with the inn having burned down years ago. There were many shootings over poker games and stagecoach robberies, some even reported to have been by the James Gang, and the possibility of gold buried nearby from them or the Knights of the Golden Circle. Maybe that history contributes to those feelings somehow. The property basically laid out like a rectangle with 2 large barns on the east side, where the driveway comes up from south to north and runs back west like a large L. First was our house, the next house was my fiancée grandma's, and at the end was my soon-to-be in-laws. I walked over to my in-laws to get some screws working on the porch, and that's where it all started, even though I was unaware until the next day, but more on that later. It was dark out when we decided to go feed our goats that were over at the barn. As we walk out my fiancé said something big and black ran through the yard. I was like, well, how big? Our door is a mere 30 to the tree line that goes straight up the mountain, and we have bear from time to time, but she said more like a large dog. We got in the Jeep and instead of heading to the barn I turned west towards the in-laws to use the headlights, and sure enough there was yellow eye shine and the outline of a large black dog that was maybe 60 yards from me. I get out with a cheap flashlight and call to the dog, but I get no reaction. Just 2 large yellow eyes staring back perfectly still. So I approach it slowly talking to it trying to call it over to me, and it just trots back toward my yard. So I walk down the drive back into the yard and trying to approach it again, and I get about 25 yards from it this time, but something wasn't right about it. It all felt off. I wasn't scared or feel threatened really, but it didn't feel right. Then it hits me. Like a ton of bricks, it was as if this thing absorbed light like some dark void from another realm. No matter how hard I tried to focus my eyes or adjust the light, I couldn't make out anything with this thing before me other than it appeared to be a dog that absorbed light. Cool. That's believable. It eventually grew tired of me, wandered off across our field to the road, and I rode it off as a neighbor's dog and moved on with my night. The next day my fiancé's grandma asked me about our big black dog. I replied with a puzzled look, and we don't have a black dog. She told me when I walked back over from getting the screws the previous day that it came down out of the woods and had followed me back towards our house. I told her that must be the dog we saw last night. I had told my fiancé about how it seemed to absorb light and something just didn't seem quite right with it all. And it was also massive. My shepherd is 70 pounds and our Pyrenees Anatolian mix was 85 pounds and it dwarfed either of them. 2 days pass without seeing the dog and it was out of mind and rode off as a neighbor's dog from down the road, or one that was dumped. 2 a.m. I'm awakened by my shepherd and Pyrenees in the house, going ballistic, barking, growling, trying to get out of their kennels. I get up, walk to the outside door quiet as I can, while the digs go ballistic and flip on the light, and the beast was on my steps and appeared to have been sniffing around the door. Soon as I turned the lights on in one fast motion, this thing did a 180, leapt off the steps and was gone into the darkness again. But this time I saw a tail, a long bushy tail like my shepherd's, but bigger and pointed ears. The black wolf. I know what you are thinking, it doesn't scary, but to see it, the way it seemed to absorb light, it felt like pure evil. Pure hatred. Something was very unnatural about it. My brother-in-law calls me a few days later and asks if I've seen a huge black dog or had any issues. He lives down the road and just through the woods from us, so I told him about it following me and the encounters. He tells me that his pit bull he keeps out back was going wild the night before and he went back there with a good bright light and 30 yards away in the woodbine was a set of yellow eyes staring back. It would close its eyes and he said you couldn't see anything like it was trying to hide. This went on a few times before he finally saw it and described it the same way I did. Yellow eyes shaped like a large wolf, but its body that endless black pit. Somehow it absorbed all light and you couldn't make out any details other than yellow eyes in the outline. The day after our wedding in early May my brother-in-law calls me to tell me it came back the night of our wedding. They got home after dark was just sitting on the porch when he heard bawling and screaming from the woods. He grabs a 12-ga pump and his light bears feet to investigate and there's the black wolf again in the edge of the thicket. Just the yellow eyes piercing back at him. Deciding he's had enough he took aim and fired. But he didn't expect what happened. A set of blue eyes suddenly appeared and dropped to the ground and the yellow eyes vanished seemingly. He cautiously approached to see a small fawn with spots laying there where the wolf had stood slobber all over its back and looking dazed. He went to pet it, but it stands up runs off right into a tree falls over, gets back up and bounds off deeper in the woods. He looked for the wolf but didn't see anything else and there was no blood. He chalked it up to it had caught the fawn and he interrupted dinner and apparently missed. We spent all our money to move putting in septic dirt work etc. So our honeymoon was a weekend at home before it was back to work. I told my wife I wanted to go investigate his claim. We get to his house and he recounts his story as we make our way to the location. I look for blood hair anything and find nothing. So I start making circles in the woods and come across a big doe that was undoubtedly the little fawn's mother. I find no signs of injury on her and can only assume she was hit by a car and that's just where she made it to. Saddened for the poor fawn knowing it won't survive and likely ended up being dinner for the wolf or coyotes. Days passed without the wolf coming back, turned to weeks turned to months, then the dream happened. We were at a horse show and my mother-in-law was trying to get my wife to get this horse. I told her absolutely not, we are not getting another horse, no way. It was a solid black gelding with a white blaze on its face. Next thing I know I'm in my kitchen looking out the window into the round pen and that horse is standing there staring at me. My in-laws had gotten it anyway. I went to ask my wife about it but couldn't find her and when I looked back it changed to a very dark, very weathered, haggard Indian looking lady with long matted black hair and dreads. Long yellow fingernails and wearing a very tattered dirty long black dress with it over her head. The material almost looked like weathered burlap or fringe and when she saw me looking at her, she smiled. Even though it was a dream I can still remember the smile. The nastiest yellow teeth ever. I spent the rest of my dream asking people about the witch that lives in the woods by the barn. Things pretty much calmed down after that for a while. Every now and then I'd see a tree with claw marks about 6 feet high that I figured was a bear. One night while skinning a big 10 pt buck something between us at the barn and our house lets out a huge roar growl. Anytime you skin deer at the barn at night something paces just inside the thicket. Sometimes it will come right for you, but shine the light and there's nothing to see and it stops moving. Soon as you ignore it, it will start to move again. I always leave the carcass and the next day they are gone. My wife was alone in the barn taking care of a goat that just had babies and getting them situated while I got something she needed from home. These were originally hay barns so the upper half on each end is open so you can hear outside pretty well when something growls at her from right outside the barn and she tells me to hurry up and bring a rifle. But besides that everything was pretty calm. Until it wasn't. I'm not sure what changed, it's been a few years since the wolf was around. But I couldn't shake the feeling it was back. I had off-the-wall nightmares, wake up in a state of fright at random, my shepherd would wake us up at 2 a.m, sometimes nights in a row barking, growling and wanting out. I let her out the first time and she bolted straight up the mountain. I grabbed a shotgun that stayed by the door, no light, and took off after her. I finally got her called back to me, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like it was trying to lure her up the mountain. Maybe because it knew I would follow. Sometimes we would wake up because it sounded like something slapped the house, but we never could find anything. It happened again. My shepherd losing her marbles at 2 a.m. wakes me up, but this time there's terrible screams coming from the goat's pen. I rush out, but it's too late. Whatever it was is gone and so is one of the goats. The rest huddled into a corner of the shelter trembling. I could hear the goat's cries as it was carried up and over the mountain at incredible speed. I felt so defeated. This was war. It has to stop. This land is ancient, but now it's our land. It's our home. We will not be ran off. I searched online and found no help, just a lot of people that fake scary things for social media attention. No real info. So I went to folklore. I cast some 405 GR bullets with silver mixed into the lead and loaded them in starline brass. I was going to put the new 45/70th with the tritium front night sight to good use. It was cool out that evening. I had my favorite meal in case it was my last. I had no idea what I was up against or if this would work. Would it even show up again? I climbed up on my roof and settled in. The moon was about 3/4 full, so plenty of light to see from my elevated position. I started to doze off. I couldn't keep myself awake, it seemed. I awoke with a start. No idea how long I had been out, but it was silent. Uncomfortably silent. I caught movement by the drive as a large low black shadow crept in towards the goats. I steadied that green glowing front sight on whatever my adversary actually was and squeezed the trigger. Click. Oh no. In my sleepy state I forgot the stupid crossbolt safety that won't let the hammer fall all the way. The black wolf stands up on its hind legs, lets out the awful roar growl that we have heard before, the most primal sound you have ever heard. It reverberates in your chest, it's so loud, but I could barely hear it over the adrenaline dump and racing heartbeat in my ears. I cocked the hammer again, took the safety off as it dropped back to all fours and squeezed the trigger. The heartbeat in my ears was replaced by tinnitus from the roar of the rifle, and I lost some of my night vision from the muzzle flash. The beast had fell to the ground, thrashed about, then bolted back into the woods. I stayed up there till daylight watching. After the sun came up and it was plenty bright enough to see, I walked to where the best stood, and there was nasty looking hunk of gray meat that smelled awful. It was the most rotten, putrid smell you could imagine. I knew it had to be there. That was a 405 GR slug that can easily stop a grizzly mid-charge. As I made it to the woods I could see small spots of dried blood, but not much and not creature. I followed the trail where I could see overturned leaves, a broken twig or ground disturbance. After I made it to the top I was really hoping I had recruited some help. I pushed on, being cautious and watching, trying to not be led into a trap of its own. I followed the trail over to the property line of the haunted inn. The land was up for sale, it never had anyone own it for long it seemed, and I had a job to see through, so pushed on. It led me down the mountain towards where the inn used to be. Before I reached the side of the inn, the trail led me by what appeared to be an old unmarked grave and back up the ridge and up a steep narrow ravine with large chunk rock and boulders. At the very top was a small opening to a cave or abandoned silver mine possibly. The area stunk so bad I could hardly keep from throwing up. The large rock overhang had some kind of old symbols carved into it, but no time to be distracted. I looked into the hole as best I could see, and I swear there was an old spear in there like what the conquistadors carried. There was no way I was fixing to go in and find out though. Between the smell, the horror of what I had seen, and how it made it all the way back here, I was done. I wanted to go home. So I did. It's been 3 years now with no sightings or strangeness. I just make sure and leave a deer at that corner of the property every year. It's never there when I come back. I guess we have some understanding. How it all ties together is anyone's guess.